Hello and welcome to the Pembrokeshire Bird Diary for August 2020. I'm Annie Haycock from the Pembrokeshire Bird Group, here to share with you some of the birding highlights for the month. We made our first trip of the year to the Ghan on the 4th, only to be greeted by Dave Astins with the news that we had just missed a Caspian tern. This the second record for Pembrokeshire. Dave was the only one who saw it, but fortunately managed to get a few photos to share it with everyone else. Caspian terns have a wide breeding range, though the bulk of the population breeds in Central Asia. Like many seabird species, they do a lot of wandering around, with 3 or 4 recorded in Britain in most years. This bird had left Kerry in southwestern Ireland 10 hours before arriving in Pembrokeshire. Then it seemed to be travelling east, reaching Norfolk 5 days later, but strangely turning west again to be in Cornwall on the 20th. It's quite possible that it was one of the birds seen elsewhere earlier in the summer. At least 2 of these earlier sightings involved a colour-ringed bird from Sweden. In the lagoon at land shipping there were 6 little egrets, including a juvenile keeping close to what were probably its parents. You can see the pale greenish-grey legs and feet, and the shorter, greyer bill compared with the adults. We strongly suspected that at least one pair had bred near land shipping this year, so perhaps this juvenile is the result. Someone in Tenby had the unusual privilege of a chough in her garden. It was a daily visitor for a while, hoovering ants from the lawn and using the pond for drinking and bathing. Choughs are more usually found on the open coast in areas of short grassland where they feed on beetle and cranefly larvae in the soil, as well as other invertebrates on the surface. On the subject of ants, we made a visit to Stackpole Warren on a day when ants were flying, swarming in search of mates. Swallows were taking advantage of this, with a flock of 50 or 60 around a particular sand dune. As well as catching the insects in flight, they were landing on the bare sand to pick up ants as they emerged. Looking at the photo back home, Bob found a melanistic individual. Melanism is a genetic variation in which the animal has more black or dark pigment than normal, though it doesn't necessarily mean the animal is all black. The opposite is leucism, where an animal is lacking in pigments in parts of its body. A few years ago we were told of a leucistic swallow in a nest. The dark eyes of this bird show that it still has some pigmentation and therefore is not an albino, which would have had pink eyes. Chris Dighton managed to photograph this leucistic magpie near Fishguard at the beginning of the month. Now to hear what Richard and Giselle have been seeing on Skocombe.
The first Arctic tern of the year flew west past the lighthouse on the 5th, 5 days earlier than the first 3 of last autumn. The first big autumn arrival of willow warblers fell on the 6th, when a minimum of 114 birds were logged. Among them was the first wood warbler to be seen on Skocombe since 2007. There was some excitement on the 8th when a feral pigeon was watched resting on the cliffs near Calf Bay. This was only the 7th record for Skocombe.
Much of our time was spent monitoring our later nesting seabirds, and by the 12th, over half of the storm petrel study nests contained home-alone chicks. The first 2 tree pipit and pied flycatcher of the autumn arrived on the 13th, and the following day at least 9 pied flycatcher were counted. This the highest day count since 10 on 21st September 1988. Although not a bird record, 3 Homo sapiens arrived on the 16th. These were the first of the year, and over 4 months later than the first of last year. Their arrival coincided with the sooty shearwater past the lighthouse. On the 17th, 287 kittiwake were ashore, one of which had been colour-ringed in France, and the first greenshank of the autumn was logged.
On the 18th, the check of the Manx shearwater study plots revealed big chicks in 70% of nests, and many of the cliff-bound Fulmar chicks were looking ready to take their first flights. The first inspection of the petrel station found 2 healthy chicks in the same boxes that contained successful pairs last year. A minimum of 17 spotted flycatcher on the 19th was the highest day count since 21 on 10 September 2004. Wild weather, which began on the 20th, produced good sea-watching conditions, and 87,520 Manx shearwater were counted to our north and south in just 2 hours. Highlights the following day included 2 sooty shearwater, 2 great skewer, and 19 storm petrels. On the 23rd, the first white wagtail of the autumn was logged, and on the 24th there were singles of sooty shearwater, great and Arctic skewers. The first, and perhaps long overdue, citrine wagtail for Skocombe was found on Winter Pond on the 27th. a bird which fed in close proximity to the 5 humans present. Just the third ever August record of great northern diver was sat on the sea just off the lighthouse on the 30th, whilst an Arctic skua was watched chasing a juvenile Sabine's gull.
This year seems to have brought quite a few rosy starlings to Pembrokeshire, but why do we have several in some years and only one or none in others? Rosy starlings breed in Central Asia and into Eastern Europe, but normally winter on the Indian subcontinent. This means their migration is generally on a northwest to southeast axis. As with many species, a few will overshoot, travelling further than they need to and ending up in Western Europe. These overshoots are most obvious when the weather across the bird's normal range is hotter than usual. And when the weather in Europe is also warm and settled, they seem to keep moving west. 2002 saw huge numbers across Europe, with 182 in Britain, 8 or 9 of them reaching Pembrokeshire. Similar conditions in 2018 also brought a lot of birds to the UK. 2020 has also been a year of hot settled spring weather, so not surprisingly rosy starlings have again been heading west, with flocks of up to 45 being seen in France. The first birds reached Britain at the end of May, and included the one seen at Marlows and on Scoma at that time. This juvenile, on Scoma in August, was one of at least 5 birds in the county this year, but a juvenile obviously hasn't overshot on migration. It isn't unusual for juveniles to migrate in apparently the wrong direction, and we wouldn't have so many rarities turn up if they always got it right. Strumble Head has a reputation as a first-class sea-watching site, but the weather has to be right with westerly winds that push the birds in close to the coast. Birds seen by Adrian Rogers and co. on the weekend of the 22nd to 23rd of August included 34 storm petrels, 8 bonxies, 2 black terns, 3 grey phalaropes, 1 Pomerine skua and 2 little gulls. Stormy weather on the 26th brought in a few more birds. Counts included 38 bonxies, 40 Arctic skuas, 2 little gulls, 15 long-tailed skuas, and 9 Sabine's gulls, as well as another black tern. Knot are often described as plain grey dumpy birds in winter, and you don't often get a close enough view of them to see anything different. Mike Davey managed it with this one at Kilpayson on the 24th, and then on the 31st a small flock of juveniles dropped into the Gann and pretty much insisted on having their photos taken. Here David Ord is having to move back because they were getting too close. He and Derek Grimwood also got some photos that showed they were anything but plain. Unfortunately, those feather edges will wear off over time, and the birds do become a more plain grey until they molt into their reddish breeding plumage in the spring. Well, that's a reminder of August. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll look out for the September edition.